I work with Equality Now. This is my 6th year with Equality Now. My work revolves around advocacy against violence against women, specifically focusing on sexual violence, but also harmful practices such as child marriage and FGM. Over the years, I've been holding these roles interchangeably within Equality Now and undertaking work around engaging members of parliament, the civil society, duty bearers like the police, the prosecutors, the magistrate and the judges in terms of enlightening them or sensitizing them on their duty to protect women and girls from this violence.
I am Fraidy Reiss. I'm a forced marriage survivor and the founder and executive director of Unchained at Last, which is working to end forced and child marriage in the United States through direct services and advocacy.
For the last 6 years, I've been at Equality Now, but even before being at Equality Now, I was still working on advocacy on ending violence against women. So cumulatively now 15 years and focusing on violations such as child marriage, FGM, sexual violence. What I've seen as great shifts, for instance, in terms of the public perception or how a child marriage is viewed is that I noted in the early years of my career that a number of governments, and especially the regions where I've worked in Africa, were interpreting marriage as a form of protection or an environment where they felt that girls who could not access education or girls who are not in formal education, they felt was somehow like seen as a protective environment. So there were actually exceptions within the law that provided for girls to be married off through the consent, of course, of the parents or of the court. And this was justified by the fact that the girl was not going to school. So I saw a lot of that, for example, in Benin, in Mauritania, and even in Tanzania, where I work even up to now. But fortunately, I think over the years, the governments have been corrected in terms of their interpretation of that principle, or the principle of the best interest of the child, that marriage is actually not a protective environment. It is not an option that the government can rely on to protect the young girls. So I think a number of governments have come to appreciate that, and this has led to raising the minimum age of marriage in a number of countries. Of course, there are still countries whose minimum age of marriage is still lower than the internationally accepted age of 18. But I think there is that appreciation that marriage is not a protective environment for girls, and actually it exposes the girls to further violations, especially girls who join it when they are not fully empowered in terms of their rights, understanding their rights, and also even empowered economically, empowered in terms of being able to stand for themselves. That is now the fact of them being agents of themselves. So research has also come in the last 30 years to actually put to the fore the kind of violations that have been happening in the context of those child marriages, and that has really helped to give us more voice as people who are advocating against child marriage, that there is now scientific evidence of what is happening in those marriages and the kind of violations that happen there. Another final development that I've seen also is that there's been momentum in terms of people working together to address the issue of child marriage, so that girls access education until a certain level where they fully understand their rights, but also they're able to stand for themselves or access other services. Of course, this has not been fully realized. So you see networks like Girls Not Brides networks. There are several other networks which work against child marriage. So I think these momentums has also helped our work and made our work more successful over the years. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and you know, Jean-Paul, so interesting when you talk about this notion of child marriage being seen as something protective, as something beneficial to children, to girls. And that's unfortunately something we still see in the United States. Legislators and even some advocates who just don't fully understand the issue of child marriage, and rather than seeing it as a harmful practice and a human rights abuse, see it as something that, should be an option for children who want it, not understanding that a child, even in the most mature 17-year-old, just doesn't have the rights of adulthood and cannot easily say no to a marriage they don't want or get out of a marriage if they wanted it originally and changed their mind, or if they never wanted it at all. So that is unfortunately something we're still seeing a lot of in the United States. But the difference from 30 years ago or even 10 years ago to today in the United States is drastic. It's absolutely drastic. Even just 10 years ago, nobody was talking about child marriage in the United States. And we at Unchained at Last, I founded Unchained originally to help survivors of forced marriage to escape either an impending or existing forced marriage. And we started the work on the advocacy to end child marriage in the United States because so many girls under 18 were calling us to ask for that same help we were providing to adults. And what we discovered is that there's almost nothing we can do to help someone who is not yet 18 to escape an impending or existing unwanted marriage. And we started our movement in 2015 when we first started realizing this is a big problem in the United States. At the time, child marriage was legal in all 50 US states, every territory, District of Columbia. Really, nobody had ever paid any attention to this. No one even knew how often it was happening in the United States. What we at Unchained at Last have done, at least, is started what is now a growing national movement where there's recognition of the fact that child marriage is happening across the United States. So far, we and our allies, including Equality Now, who's been there from the beginning with us, we have helped to pass legislation in 7 out of 50 US states to ban all marriage before age 18. And those networks that you were talking about, Jean-Paul, I mean, that's another thing that we're really seeing at Unchained at Last in the United States. We and Equality Now co-convened the National Coalition to End Child Marriage in the United States, which is ever growing. And we also at Unchained have worked in each state where we've introduced legislation to end child marriage to create a state coalition also focused on passing legislation to ban all marriage before 18. Our hashtag is 18, no exceptions.
Yeah, it is interesting because especially for someone working in Africa, there is that level of support that comes to support the work in terms of ending child marriage. And now when you look at, like, for example, the work in terms of passing the laws in 7 states out of the 50 states, I mean, that is huge. That is a lot of work. Yeah, so just looking at that and also reflecting on the work we are doing here in Africa in terms of promoting progressive laws that ban marriages below the age of 18, and looking at it from the continental perspective, so that we have this African Union, which has come up with a model sort of guideline in terms of addressing child marriage, and they are calling it is a joint general recommendation by the African Commission and the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, basically guiding the countries in terms of why they need to address child marriage, why they need to raise the minimum age of marriage and ensure that no marriage takes place without confirming the age of the people who are getting married. Despite those kind of development, still there are countries who still hold on to their own specific national legislations, which of course do not conform. So yeah, I agree that there's been a lot of development, but still there's still some work to do. Yeah, thank you.
Well, Jean-Paul, I wonder, in the United States, what we found was that the problem was the laws. When we first started doing this, the laws allowed marriage before 18 in every US state. And our research showed that between 2000 and 2018, 300,000 minors were married in the United States, meaning children under the age of 18. And they were all legal marriages. It's because the law allowed it. If we banned marriage before 18 in every state, those 300,000 children would not have married. And I wonder if that's what you're seeing also in Africa. Is it the problem is the laws themselves, or is it that people aren't following the law?
The problem is more or less the same, partly the law, but also I think in Africa there's a lot of still cultural and even some elements of religious beliefs that promote that kind of early or child marriage practice, in the sense that there is still that tradition held by some communities, unfortunately, where the girl is not viewed equally as the boy, in the sense that gender equality and gender parity is still something that is not yet achieved in many countries in Africa, and the disparity is still very high in some countries. So then you realize that the girl traditionally in Africa has been seen, for example, as a source of bride wealth. So there are still those kind of practices which will push these girls and, of course, their parents to marry them off, despite the fact that in some cases the law has been changed and the law is very progressive. But there's those retrogressive cultures which still look upon the girl as a breadwinner in terms of her being married off. And, of course, in some communities, the younger the girl, the more the quote-unquote bride wealth. So whether if it is livestock or if it is money, so there is still that element. And the other driving factors, of course, are poverty and, of course, now climate change as well, where some communities experience a lot of drought. And we've had cases where these communities which experience a lot of drought give out their girls to, quote-unquote, so to speak, well-off communities as part of lessening the burden or the dependence within a family. So really, there are other intricate factors which really need to be addressed. And some of these cultures are what we are now addressing from our communications perspective, but even also from our networks in terms of the women's rights movements that we are engaging. So, for example, at Equality Now, we are secretariat of this group we call the Solidarity for African Women's Rights Movement, which now looks at how do we change the social attitude. So while we focus on the law, but we also have that other aspect of culture, religion, practices.
So you have to change the laws, and you have to convince people that girls matter, that they count, that they are important, and that they are not like
True.
livestock.
Yeah.
Wow. Yes. Good luck.
Thank you.
Probably the single biggest challenge that we face at Unchained at Last and our allies like Equality Now as we work to end child marriage in the United States is the fact that even though it is a pervasive problem impacting hundreds of thousands of children, even though child marriage remains legal in 43 US states, still most Americans have no idea this is happening. We are trying to solve a really serious, significant problem, a terrible human rights abuse that is fairly widespread, but still remains a well-kept secret somehow. If we could just get the word to all Americans, hey, did you know this is still legal in your state, probably in your country? When people find out, they want to help. They're horrified. And polls show that most Americans want the marriage age to be 18. The problem is they think it's already there. And by the way, so that adds another problem is that legislators who are not accustomed to prioritizing girls' issues, and when you pass legislation to end marriage before 18, basically all you're doing is helping girls. You're saving girls from a human rights abuse. And this is not something that legislators are accustomed to prioritizing. These are girls and they're not even old enough to vote. So because their own constituents don't even know about this, they can just ignore the legislation, let it die, water it down, and they're not getting any pushback. So the biggest challenge is the fact that Americans don't know about this, so they're not telling their legislators, hey, we put you in office, and we need you to just pass this simple, common sense legislation that harms no one, it costs nothing, and it ends a human rights abuse, make the marriage age 18, no exceptions. And John Paul, I wonder if that's similar to the biggest challenge you're facing.
Yes, somehow similar, and I'm just reflecting on your approach, and it is really interesting that you're focusing on the people, which is really interesting, and I mean a good way to go in terms of people appreciating that this is a problem that needs to be addressed, because it is that way is where now resources will also be pushed to the issue. I think the only nuance in terms of what I'm seeing here in Africa, and we are privileged that we've worked in so many countries in Africa as Equality Now, is that there is some reluctance from the government side, and of course, in this sense, government meaning the legislature and the executive as well. So some presidents and also some members of parliament, just the same case in the US, who are basically indifferent to the issue. And for them, despite the fact that they see, I think the only difference is that here they see it every day. I mean, when they pass along the roads, they see young girls with children begging along the road. So it's not something that is hidden, that they'll say that they're not seeing it. They are seeing it as a problem. They are reading it every day in the newspapers. They're watching it on the television. When we say the transition level of girls from basic education to secondary education is very low compared to boys. So they see it every day. But yet there's that element of indifference, which I think is really something that I wouldn't say is out of ignorance, but some lack of prioritization. That's the same way you've put it on women's rights, on girls' rights, because they see this every day. Yet when you take a bill to them, for example, learning from what we've just done in Tanzania, where we've supported a court case for them to raise the minimum age of marriage to 18. And the Court of Appeal, which is the highest court in Tanzania, actually gave its judgment and said that, yes, the law needs to be changed, and gave the government a timeline to change the law. But now I think we are almost 4 or 5 years down the line. The government has done nothing. And the government is saying that they're going back to the people to ask for their opinion where the law should be changed. I mean, the court has ordered the government to change the law, but they're saying they have to go back and ask the people. So then we ask ourselves, don't they believe or trust the wisdom of the judges, or even the expertise that the judges have interpreted the issues and agreed that 18 years would be the best, at least for now, because again, the world is evolving, but at least for now, that is what has been recognized internationally. So that level of indifference, especially amongst the duty bearers, the people who are supposed to make the changes happen, is really discouraging. But I am happy that as Equality Now, and of course with our partners, this is our everyday work, where we are engaging these parliamentarians, sharing with them case studies of what is happening in the so-called marriages, especially of young girls, where some of them end up in polygamous marriages, and there's a lot of violations that happen in those contexts. Some of them end up getting children when they are very young. So we bring this to their attention, and in some cases, we've actually been privileged to even enter into the parliaments and share and debate with them on the issues. And of course, there are those who understand, take their time to understand the problems and appreciate and support our cause, but still there are those who are very indifferent. And as politicians also, with them changing after every either 5 years, 4 years. So sometimes you go until you reach a point where you feel they're going to pass the law. Like the case in Tanzania, we supported them until we even had a draft bill of changing the law. Then now the elections were done, and there's a whole new group coming in, and you have to take them also through the whole system again. So as a biggest challenge, I think the legal change process is really a long one, and sometimes it takes time. But reflecting from 30 years and the 27 years of Beijing now, I think a lot has happened, and we are happy that now we have some members of parliament who we can say are champions, and we can call them actually to speak to other members of parliament. But still, the war is yet to be won, in the sense that if you look at the statistics in my own country, Kenya, here we are speaking of at the moment, I think around 23%, that's meaning almost 3 girls out of 10 are married off as children. If you look at countries like Tanzania, is 30, over 30%. That means almost 4 girls out of 10. If you look at Uganda, it's almost 5 girls out of 10. So, and in fact, if you look at other countries like Niger, Mauritania, it is even higher. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but I think on the legal front, we've made a lot of strides. We've put in place at the regional level. It is now streamlining the national laws to be able to outlaw child marriage. And I'm really proud of the work Equality Now has been doing so far.
And I mean, there's just so much overlap between the work you're doing and, in Africa, and the work we're doing here in the US. We're, again, just trying to get legislators to care. When we finally convince one, the legislative session is over, and then there's a whole new batch of legislators the next session. I so feel for you. That's not easy. And how frustrating that you won that court case in Tanzania, and still the government, what was the timeline that the court gave the government to pass the legislation? You said 4 or 5 years have passed since then. How long did they have?
Yes, initially the government was given 6 months, and this was 2019, no, actually 2016. Yeah, thereabout. And when they were given 6 months, we were so hopeful that they are going to that is the High Court, they are going to change the law. But then surprisingly, the government went and appealed the case that that the court did not interpret the law correctly. Of course, the usual defenses between lawyers. So when the government appealed, of course, now the 6 months time was no longer an issue because there's an appeal pending. So the appeal was heard and concluded in 2019. And the Court of Appeal concurred with the High Court and said that the court did well interpret both the international agreements that Tanzania has ratified and signed, and also their own national constitution, which basically had recognized the age of the child as 18. So basing of that, the Court of Appeal gave them more time now, 1 year again, to be able to change that law. But that is where now the problem started, in the sense that immediately, I think 1 or 2 years down the line, there was a change in government, and whenever a change in government happens, priorities change. So then I think the issue of child marriage for the new government, there were other pressing issues, and then at the same time there was COVID-19 for quite some time, for almost 2-3 years. And so you can imagine a lot of issues happening while we are also trying to continue advocating and reminding them of that particular case and the need to raise the minimum age. But we are happy that now at least they've issued a notice as late as yesterday, 28th of September, calling for the public to share their views. But our concern with that notice again was that they are saying that in Parliament somehow there was a proposal to put the age at 15 to 17, and we are wondering, and that's what the court had actually reprimanded them against. So it is really a back and forth fight. But yeah, I'm happy that that's why we are here as the civil society and the women's rights protectors, so that we keep on pushing them, because some of these girls cannot actually come and speak to the government directly because of their vulnerabilities and even because of the situations which they find themselves in. But we are happy to represent them where we can and share their stories where it's possible. Also, we sometimes ask those survivors who are strong enough, who are resilient, to attend the sessions and speak to the parliamentarians so that they can see the real life scenario of what it means when a girl is married, when she's not yet empowered. And some of those violations are really appalling. So it is a really long process, but we think that finally the government will give in, because there's no other option. We'll keep on going to another court at the regional level, at the international level, because it is something we believe is wrong and the government needs to correct it. Yeah.
Yes, and again, so much overlap with what we're seeing, the lengths that legislators will go to avoid just passing legislation to make it 18. Well, what if we make it 17? An exception if she's pregnant, and every trick in the book just to avoid doing something so simple and obvious and logical. And I was going to ask you the $1 million question of what strategies do you use to convince legislators, no, this is important. Girls matter. You need to make it 18. And so I heard you saying bringing survivors forward to share their own stories when that's possible, which is, again, a strategy that we definitely use whenever we can. I wonder if you have other strategies that you use that we could learn from also.
Well, over the years, we've tried a number of strategies. Where one of them is getting the survivors who are able to speak directly, but also we've managed to get some legislators whom over the years we have engaged, and therefore they speak on our behalf in some of the parliamentary sessions, in the parliamentary committees. So they speak to the different parliamentary members of parliament in small groups, because that also helps to diffuse the opposition, so that instead of speaking to a very huge number of legislators, who some of them will actually use even derogatory language and even lead to further and more violations. So they divide them into small committees and they engage them more at a personal level, so that they interrogate actually some of the beliefs that they hold, because there was that element also, a perception that child marriage is supported by Islam. So we also bring experts on board, people who have studied Islamic law, for them to declare to them and also just to enlighten them that they might have been practicing it, yes, but then it is not a requirement within the Quran that girls have to be married as children. So that also helps dispel some of the misconception. Because again, you know, with politicians, when they get a misconception, they really know how to capitalize on it, and they can use it to detriment of so many people. So that's another way in which we bring on board experts who identify with the issue, and then they're able to dispel, because us as Equality Now, we are not experts in Islamic law, but when we bring those experts, we partner with them. Like there's one university in Sudan where we partner, because for them, that is what they do. They study the Quran, they interpret the Quran, and they're able to lay that bare to the members of the assembly, and they are able to appreciate that actually this is not a religious requirement. I think the other ways is engaging in what we call developing model laws. For instance, we've been part of the group that worked on what we call the South African Development Economic Development Community Model Law on Ending Child Marriage. So this is a model law that us as Equality Now, we look at it as lawyers, and therefore we are able to support a government that is willing to outlaw child marriage and also support those girls who are already in child marriages. So the law has provisions both to criminalize where it is necessary to criminalize the act of child marriage, but also to provide for services and response for those girls who are already in those marriages, for them to be rescued and provided with the necessary support. So we have countries who are willing to do that, but they don't know how to. So then we provide them with that, and we walk them through on how they can enact and implement such kind of a legislation.
Okay, well, brilliant. And again, a lot of that overlaps with what we're doing in the United States. The bringing in the religious experts, that is so crucial, because in the United States too, you're absolutely right. Legislators just make up in their head that this religion or that religion, you know, requires child marriage, or it's a necessary part of the religion. Sometimes even offending specific religious communities who are saying, what, where did you come up with this? We're not practicing. That happened with a specific religious community in Pennsylvania, where legislators were saying, no, we can't do this. We're really going to offend the Amish community, until somebody went to speak to the Amish community. They said, what are you talking about? We don't practice child marriage. We don't even allow child marriage. So yeah, we have, again, overlap there. But I guess there is, I just have to say, Jean-Paul, there is something very encouraging and inspirational for us here to know that we have allies around the world doing the same thing we're doing, no matter how tough it is, sticking to it and insisting that we all need, every country and state in the world, we all need to end child marriage, 18, no exceptions. It's really wonderful to know we have allies like you on the other side of the world.
Great, thank you very much. Makes a lot of sense. Maybe just one question. I know Catherine is almost telling us time is done, but then in terms of oppositions, at some point, I think that was in 2019 or 2020, especially in the region where I work in Africa, there was a bit of discussions between marriage and the age of marriage and the age of consent to sex, and it was really a hot issue in terms of looking at the developing or evolving capacities of the adolescents, and also vis-a-vis the issue. And for us, I think what helped us is that we really worked so hard to clarify the difference between the two. That is, there is the aspect of teenagers engaging in sexual activities, especially given the current age where people are exposed to a lot of things at an early age, vis-a-vis now the aspect of child marriage. Because at some point we felt that there was an opposition in the sense that a number of legislators, so to speak, but also other groups within the society who somehow were confusing the two, and of course with religious sort of beliefs, which were emphasizing on issues of virginity, and were feeling that if girls are able to engage in sex early, or boys are able to engage in sex early, then it would be better for them to get married early. But I'm happy that we crossed that bridge, because it was really a dark moment, I would say, for me personally, having worked on ending child marriage, ending harmful practices. When that debate came up, it was really a dark moment, but I'm happy that we were able to navigate it and separate those two things, where now they are totally separated. That teenagers can have sex on their own, they can do their own things, their own relations. But then when it comes to the issue of marriage, it's a totally different play, it's a totally different setup with responsibilities, with so many other things. Yeah, so I don't know whether it was the same in your area, but yeah, just something to share.
Yes, we did. We had that same dark moment, I'm afraid. We've had many dark moments, and that was one of them. Well, if you're old enough to consent to sex, then you're old enough to marry. What does one have to do with the other? Marriage is a serious legal contract that is really, that is almost impossible for somebody who's not yet 18 to get out of. It's very different from a sexual experience. So we also had the dark moment of, and I think we're still probably in this dark moment. Well, if you're old enough to have an abortion, then you're old enough to get married. Again, what does that have to do with it? What does medical care have to do with entering into this really serious contract? So yes, we've had such similar dark moments. You know, it should be, it's so obvious. And why is it so hard to convince people that marriage should be for adults? I don't know. Do you?
I don't.
It's just amazing how it's the same thing. It doesn't matter what side of the world you're on. It's almost what you're describing. It's like you're around the corner from me. It's almost the same thing. It really is important to know that whether you're in Tanzania or in Mississippi, it's the same fight.